You are not keeping your options open. Your options are keeping you open, like a tab that never closes, quietly draining your attention, your memory, and your ability to feel sure about anything. Quick thing before I go deeper. We are building toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription genuinely helps us reach more people who actually want psychology that does not insult their intelligence. And if this hits a nerve, tap like so the algorithm takes it seriously. Okay, back to the uncomfortable part. You have felt this even if you have never named it. You are talking to someone you like, but you keep one eye on who else might be out there. You are in a job that is fine, but you keep browsing roles just to see. You start learning a skill, then switch again, because you do not want to pick the wrong identity. And the story you tell yourself is, I am being smart, I am being flexible, I am avoiding regret. Here is what is actually happening. The brain does not experience open options as freedom. It experiences them as unfinished business. And unfinished business does not sit politely in the background. It keeps reloading itself into working memory, like a process you cannot quit. Most people think the cost is just time and indecision. The real cost is deeper. It changes how you perceive value, how you attach to people, and how your nervous system learns to trust you. Let me show you what I mean with the first mechanism. Keeping options open creates what I call a perpetual audition state. You think you are evaluating choices, but psychologically, you are training yourself to be evaluated. In an audition state, you do not inhabit a choice. You perform for a hypothetical better choice. Even when nobody is watching, you act like you might need to pivot at any second. That stance is subtle, but it is biologically expensive. The brain's threat system does not only light up for danger, it also lights up for uncertainty with stakes. And open options are uncertainty with stakes on repeat. Think about this for a second. If you are dating but keeping it casual because you want to maintain optionality, you are not simply avoiding commitment. You are keeping your attachment system in a holding pattern. Attachment is not just a feeling, it is a predictive model. It is your brain deciding whether a person is a stable base or a variable. If they are a variable, you do not fully downshift. You do not fully co-regulate. You stay slightly vigilant. That vigilance feels like excitement at first. Later it feels like emptiness and restlessness, and you blame the person or you blame yourself. Now here is where it gets interesting. This audition state does not only make you anxious, it also makes you less accurate. Because when you are trying to keep many doors open, you start judging everything through reversibility. Can I undo this? Can I back out? Can I keep the receipt? And the brain loves reversible decisions because they feel safe. But you pay for that safety by warping your value system. You start preferring options that preserve future optionality over options that are actually good. In behavioral economics, there is a classic pattern. When people are given the ability to switch later, they often delay choosing, and they report less satisfaction even when they end up with something objectively similar. The mechanism behind this is not just indecision. It is that the mind keeps comparing the chosen thing to an imagined alternative, because the alternative still feels psychologically alive. And that leads to the second mechanism, which almost nobody talks about. Open options prevent value consolidation. Normally, after you choose, your brain does a quiet kind of housekeeping. It downregulates the attractiveness of the options you did not pick and upregulates the meaning of what you did pick. Not because you are irrational, but because a nervous system needs coherence. Without coherence, you cannot act decisively, and without decisiveness, you cannot build skill, relationships, or identity. When you refuse to close doors, you block that consolidation process. Your brain cannot metabolize the choice into a stable preference. So you keep living with raw, unprocessed possibility. That sounds poetic until you realize it is basically psychological indigestion. Notice the pattern here. You are not stuck because you cannot choose. You are stuck because you will not let your brain finish the choice. This is why people who keep every option open often describe their life as strangely unreal, like they are hovering near their own life, not inside it. They can explain everything, analyze everything, keep escape routes ready, but they cannot feel settled. Settled becomes synonymous with trapped. And just to tighten the screw a little more, this also changes how you experience time. There is a cognitive phenomenon where unfinished tasks remain more mentally accessible than finished ones. Your brain tags them as important because they are unresolved. So if your life is made of unresolved decisions, your attention is constantly being pulled backward and sideways by what could be instead of forward by what is. Let me make this concrete. You accept a job offer, but keep interviewing just in case. You start the job, and you cannot learn the culture deeply because your mind is still half outside. Your co-workers feel that. They do not say it, but they respond with less trust. You interpret their distance as proof that you should keep looking. And now you have created a self-fulfilling loop. Optionality erodes belonging, and lack of belonging makes optionality feel necessary. But there is another layer here, and this is the part people do not want to admit. Keeping options open can be a status strategy. In modern life, being in demand is social currency. The person with options feels superior to the person who chose. So you unconsciously protect optionality because it protects your ego. It lets you believe you are not fully accountable to any one path. If something fails, it was never your real thing. If a relationship ends, you were never all in. If you do not master a skill, you were exploring. That sounds like confidence. Psychologically, it is often fear of singularity, fear of becoming one thing with a track record that can be judged. And that brings us to the third mechanism. Optionality fragments identity. Identity is not a list of traits. Identity is the brain's compression algorithm for your life. And it takes messy experience and compresses it into a story that lets you predict yourself. When you keep every option open, you refuse compression. You keep everything in high resolution, which feels expansive, but it is cognitively expensive and emotionally brittle. You end up with what I think of as a portfolio self. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, always diversified. And diversification is smart, financially, but psychologically, it can be a defense against being known, even by you. Because a committed choice does something scary. It makes your preferences legible. It exposes what you actually value. And once that is exposed, you can be wrong. You can be judged. You can regret. So instead you live in the fog of potential, where you can always claim you would have been great if you had just chosen. Here is the question that usually lands hard. What if the reason you cannot decide is not that you need more information, but that you are protecting yourself from the kind of evidence that only commitment creates? Stay with me, because this next part recontextualizes everything. The worst psychological cost of keeping options open is not anxiety. It is distrust in your own future self. When you constantly leave escape hatches, you teach yourself a lesson. My decisions are temporary. And if your decisions are temporary, your brain treats your intentions as unreliable signals. You say, I am going to start, and some deeper part of you says, we will see. You say, this matters, and your system says, for now. Over time, motivation stops showing up, and not because you are lazy, but because your brain will not spend energy on goals that your pattern suggests you will abandon. Motivation is an investment. Your nervous system has a budget. If your past behavior says that you do not follow through, it stops funding you. This is why people who keep every option open often feel chronically tired, not always physically, existentially. Decision fatigue is not just too many choices in a day, it is the cumulative cost of maintaining multiple selves in parallel. Now, I want to add a nuance because this is where people get defensive. Optionality is not always bad. In fact, in early exploration, in unstable environments, or when you are escaping something harmful, keeping options open is intelligent. The cost shows up when optionality becomes your default identity, not a temporary tactic. So how do you know which one it is in your life? Here is a framework I use, and I want you to actually test it. I call it the option loop diagnostic. 3 questions. First, does keeping this option open reduce your anxiety in the moment, but increase your anxiety over the week? If yes, that is not strategic flexibility. That is short-term threat relief. You are using optionality like a sedative. Second, does optionality protect you from disappointment, or does it protect you from evidence? Disappointment is inevitable. Evidence is optional. If you avoid commitment, you avoid the data that would tell you who you actually are when things get hard. Third, if you had to make this choice irreversible for 6 months, would you feel grief or panic? Grief means you are closing a real door. Panic means you have been using open doors to regulate your nervous system. And now we get to the unifying mechanism behind all of this. The psychological cost is not the open options themselves. It is living in what game theory would call continuous reconsideration. A stable life requires what you could call a freeze function, not freezing out of fear, but freezing a decision long enough for downstream systems to adapt. Skill acquisition needs it. Relationships need it. Trust needs it. Even joy needs it, because joy is hard to feel when your brain is still shopping. When you never freeze a decision, you stay in evaluation mode. And evaluation mode is a different brain state than living mode. Evaluation mode is comparative, vigilant, future-oriented, and status-aware. Living mode is immersive, present, iterative, and meaning-making. You can feel the difference. In evaluation mode, you keep asking, is this the best? In living mode, you ask, what can I build with this? That is the ultimate insight. Commitment is not primarily a moral virtue. It is a cognitive technology. It collapses a messy decision tree into a single path so your brain can allocate resources efficiently. When you commit, you stop paying the rent on imaginary lives. So what do you actually do with this without turning it into some simplistic just decide advice? You create intentional irreversibility in small, controlled doses. Not forever decisions. Time-boxed closures. You tell your brain, for the next 90 days, this is the path. Not because it is perfect, but because I'm going to let my nervous system consolidate value. I am going to let the alternative options die a little, so the chosen option can become real. And you also practice what I call clean endings. If you are not choosing something, you do not keep it on life support. You close it with respect. You write down what you learned, why you are not doing it now, and what would have to change for it to reopen. That last part matters because it stops your brain from reopening the same loop every Tuesday at 2 a.m. There is one more twist that most people miss. When you close options, you do not just lose possibilities. You gain a new sense, a sense of direction. Direction is not a personality trait. It is an emergent property of closed loops. You cannot feel direction when you refuse to exclude. So if you have been living like a browser with 50 tabs open, I want you to notice something this week. Watch how many times you use just in case as a reason. And just in case is sometimes wisdom. But very often it is fear wearing the mask of intelligence, because the truth is, keeping every option open is not avoiding regret. It is choosing a slow, daily regret you can barely feel until one day you realize you have been faithful to possibility and unfaithful to your life. If this changed how you see your own indecision, tell me in the comments where optionality has been costing you the most: work, relationships, identity, or just peace. And here is the question I will leave you with. What would your mind feel like not after you found the perfect option, but after you finally stopped keeping the door cracked open for a life you are not living?